Welcome to the Amazon Lord of the Rings series panel. My name is Blake Casselman. I am the moderator for this panel. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to talk about something new coming from Tolkien. It's going to be on everyone's TVs and devices here in the next little while. I am a Salt Lake City-based screenwriter and film producer and comic book writer, and I'm a lifelong Tolkien fan. And before we get the discussion going, I'll turn the time over to my panelists, starting with Dan.
Hi, my name is Dan Haring. I was born and raised in Utah. I worked in film and animation for about 10 years doing visual effects and feature animation. Now I work in video games and also a lifelong Tolkien fan. Love everything about his world. And in general, I'm a huge geek, a big comic book fan, as you can probably see. I'm excited to be here.
I'm Bob Defendi, and I've only read The Silmarillion 6 times. The Second Age is my weakest point, but I was all they could find at short notice when everybody canceled.
Yes, and just a word to our audience. There were other people listed as part of this panel, and it's one of those things where some illnesses happened, some scheduling conflicts happened, and life happens. So anyway, Robert, thank you for jumping in.
Don't take my self-deprecation seriously. I love Tolkien. I love everything about it. I live and breathe it.
So I wanted to start off talking a little bit about the history of the Middle Earth on the big and the small screens. So bear with me as I'm going to be really brief, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for what we have coming up. So the first opportunity for Tolkien's writings to be adapted to the screen was in 1938 with Walt Disney. Walt Disney wanted to adapt part of The Hobbit. I think it had been published about 4 or 5 years at this point, to be part of Fantasia. Tolkien, I guess, didn't really like Walt Disney, and so that went nowhere. Jump up to the 50s, Forrest J. Ackerman, most famous for Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, got the rights to The Lord of the Rings, and a screenwriter by the name of Grady Zimmerman wrote a script for it, which Tolkien turned down quite vehemently with some of the creative licenses the screenwriter took. One thing that was pointed out in the script, it had it had Sam stealing the ring from Frodo and taking it to Mount Doom himself. And I guess Tolkien really didn't care for that idea.
They probably cut Tom Bombadil too.
Starting the long history of cutting Tom Bombadil out. Started with Grady Zimmerman. Then we jump ahead into the 60s, and Apple Films sought to get the film rights for The Lord of the Rings. And of course, Apple was owned by the Beatles. John wanted to play Gandalf. Some reports say John wanted to play Gandalf, and others say he wanted to play Gollum. Paul McCartney wanted to play Frodo. Ringo Starr wanted to play Sam, and George Harrison wanted to play Aragorn. They approached some young British directors at the time, including Stanley Kubrick and David Lean, who directed Lawrence of Arabia. Both of them turned it down, and then ultimately Tolkien turned down the chance for the Beatles to adapt his work. Then in the 1970s, United Artists got the rights to it, and they hired John Boorman, British director John Boorman, to direct a 3-hour film that would have encompassed all 3 books into the single film. Boorman and his writing partner Rospo Pollenberg kind of did away with the Catholic symbolism of Tolkien's writings and replaced it with Carl Jung, philosophy and sexualized it quite a bit. They actually got as far as to creating some weapons and props and costumes before United Artists backed out, feeling it was too expensive. And some of those props and weapons and costumes ended up in a later John Borman film called Excalibur, which came out in 1981. Then we jump ahead to 1977, and we had the Rankin Bass TV version of The Hobbit animated. Guessing we were all youngins, or am I dating myself?
Yeah, I saw it when I was a kid. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
I mean, however young we are, we probably first saw it when we were a kid.
Absolutely.
Right.
So anyway, I think a lot of people have fond memories of that one. That had original music sung by Glenn Yarborough in it, and it was pretty. It was low budget animation, but it was pretty. It followed the source material pretty closely. After that, in 1978, Ralph Bakshi came out with what was supposed to be part one of a Lord of the Rings animated feature. That one that I also loved as a kid. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it later on home video. That one was a critical and box office failure, and so the studio pulled the plug on part two. So really, the film covers Fellowship of the Ring until about halfway through the Two Towers. In 1980, Rankin Bass stepped in and sort of made a made-for-TV sequel to the Ralph Bakshi film. They did the Return of the King, but again, it was geared more for kids. Much lower budget animation. And then, of course, we jump ahead to 2001 to 2003, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was a huge success, a very big pop culture footprint for this film series that still resonates with a lot of people today. And then in 2012 to 2014, we got the Hobbit trilogy, again from Peter Jackson, which did well box office wise, but not critically and not as much with the fans. This film was originally supposed to be the series was originally supposed to be two films, directed by Benicio del Toro. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so.
And he dropped out when there was some legal delays, restructuring of MGM, who co-owned the rights to The Hobbit going back to the 70s. And then Jackson stepped in when Del Toro dropped out, and he later claimed that he didn't have the proper time to adequately prepare. So with that in mind, I wanted to throw a question out there to kind of get the conversation going.
Guillermo del Toro, not Benicio.
Guillermo. Benicio's the actor.
Right.
Guillermo. All right.
Thank you, chat.
Somebody's probably yelling at me or at their computer at me when I said Benicio. Thank you, Robert. Is it time to do another Lord of the Rings adaptation? Is the audience or the Tolkien fans hungry for something like that on the heels of Peter Jackson's very successful Lord of the Rings trilogy and then less successful Hobbit? What do you think?
Well, I don't know that the Tolkien fans are, but there's a whole new generation, I think, that is ready for him. Because I don't think that the Hobbit quite hit as a cultural touchstone that the original movies did, and that's almost 20 years ago now, right? So,
the Hobbit movies, 2012 to 2014, so 8.
No, I mean the original. The original
fact,
which were the cultural cult.
Yes,
like
in fact, the Fellowship of the Rings turns 20 years old this year, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So
making me feel even older.
Right. The people who that was a huge hit for, could very easily be having 20-year-old kids right now. Yeah. So I think it's it's a good time for it. I think it's a real good time for it. And the diehard fans are always ready for another hopeful, stab at that apple. But I don't. I don't know that there's a lot of like momentum in the fan community for it.
Okay. Well, well, go ahead, Dan.
Let's just say it's kind of it kind of depends on how it turns out. I mean, so I'm a huge Batman fan. Batman '89 came out; it was great. By the time they got around to Batman and Robin, I was burned out, and I kind of likened it to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I mean, if they come out with another thing that is on par with The Hobbit, then people are going to check out early. I think they're not going to appreciate as much. If they can manage something that is on par with Lord of the Rings, as far as pleasing the fans and also being a compelling story, I think any time is a good time as long as you can do it well.
If they can come out with something that's on
Right.
par with The Expanse, just keep that level of writer room quality, keep that level of production value quality. Integrity to the.
Well, I think one thing that
material.
that made the Jackson series so successful, it was like a very big budget passion project for Jackson and Company.
Mhm.
And if and J.D. Payne, who of course a number of our attendees will remember came in 2017 as a special guest and a panelist. And some of our panelists remember doing panels with him. He's the co-showrunner and one of the head writers for at least season 1, and the stakes are high, and the passion needs to be there. I feel for it. If you're just showing up to do a job, it's you're going to find yourself in more of Hobbit territory than Lord of the Rings territory.
Even when I disagreed with Jackson's choices in the original trilogy, I never doubted that his choices came from a place of love. You know what I mean? Even when the Witch King freaking broke Gandalf's staff, I still knew it was a man who loved the material who was making that choice.
Right.
Yeah. And when the elves showed up to Helm's Deep and the weird representation of Galadriel when Frodo offered her the ring, I agree with you. They seemed weird to me, especially the first time I saw it. Weird choices, but
most of them I could see where they got there. Like the Galadriel thing, I wouldn't have gone there, but I could see how they got there, right, from the material.
Another reason why, and Dan, you touched on this a little, is we don't know a whole lot about this series. Whereas you say we're doing a Lord of the Rings trilogy, the books are there. People have read the books over and over again for decades, and we're going to do a movie series on The Hobbit. Again, same story, but this one they've been more tight-lipped. I want to read the official synopsis.
The one from like a month ago,
from Amazon.
Yeah,
from Amazon Studios. It was released about a month ago. And so maybe this can kind of give us.
Yeah, Kitty, Kitty wants to hear the summation too. Come here, Kitty. Go ahead.
Yeah, get the cat. This is really important. I get my cat, but my cat doesn't want to come.
Lady Fluffington is a huge Falcon fan, so.
Amazon Studios' forthcoming series brings to screens for the very first time, the heroic legends of the fabled Second Age of Middle-earth's history. So, Bob or Robert, are we going into Silmarillion territory?
I mean, they don't have rights to it, but yes. I mean, they're going to have to mine from all the information from the appendixes.
Okay, so appendices and Silmarillion. The epic drama is set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and will take viewers back to an era in which great powers were forged, kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin, unlikely heroes were tested, hope hung by the finest of threads, and the greatest villain that ever flowed from Tolkien's pen threatened to cover all the world in darkness. Is this is this Sauron? Early
do you think?
Sauron, young Sauron?
I mean, Morgoth is over there being like, "Wait, what? Come on."
I mean, he can't really be sicking his PR department on them. He's in the void in the Second Age. So
Okay. Okay.
I mean, they have to be talking like literally, literarily, right? Like from a literary standpoint, Sauron's his greatest villain. From a power standpoint, he isn't. But Morgoth gets very little character development.
Sure.
It continues. Beginning in a time of relative peace, the series follows an ensemble cast of characters, both familiar and new, as they confront the long-feared reemergence of evil to Middle-earth. From the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains to the majestic forests of the elf capital of Lindon, to the breathtaking island kingdom of Numenor, to the farthest reaches of the map, these kingdoms and characters will carve out legacies that live on long after they are gone. So again, not a whole lot of information, but at least they've established that it is going to be the Second Age. One thing that jumped out at me was the ensemble cast of characters, both familiar and new. So I'd like to turn to you, gentlemen, to see if you have an idea of who they might be talking about. Who shows up in The Hobbit and or The Lord of the Rings that was around during the Second Age?
Well, so
Gil-galad, the Witch King. Or go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was just that jumped out to me too, because I was like, okay, this can either mean that they are familiar to people who have seen those movies and new, meaning like characters you haven't heard of, or does it mean that they are familiar to people who are familiar with all of the lore and new characters that they're inventing? So I'm wondering which direction they're going to go, because Elrond is around. There were characters that we're familiar with from the movies, and then there's a slew of people that most people are not going to have heard of.
Is Gandalf around in the Second Age?
He is.
Yes. Okay.
I think the official word on him is that he was running around behind the scenes, like manipulating stuff, and that I can't remember if the Astari had come in the Second Age. But he's around, and what they say about him is so ambiguous that you could do just about anything with him. And like I got the impression that he might still be in spirit form in the Second Age. But that, I mean, it's not. I don't think it said outright what form he was in.
No.
And that's something that the showrunners or whatever could easily, alter slightly to their needs, and it'd probably be fine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that with them pulling from appendices and maybe sneaking stuff out of the Silmarillion, even though they don't have the rights, I'm sure that there's going to be some creative license, and so probably how they pull it off, the execution pleasing the fans, is probably going to be how where they take creative license and how that is into relationship to the information that Tolkien actually put about the Second Age. I did do some other research, and young Aragorn kept coming up, but is that too?
That's too early for.
Is that too early?
Yeah.
He was born last century of the Third Age, right?
Right.
I know he was long lived, but he wasn't Gandalf.
No, he's like 84 in the movies.
Okay. Okay.
So they mentioned Lindon, which is the realm of Gil-galad, if I remember correctly. Gil-galad gets a lot of like theoretical play, but I don't think Tolkien ever wrote like an entire paragraph on Gil-galad in all of his writings. So at least all of his published writings. So there's a lot of room for them to play with there.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got the whole fall of the Nazgul to play with. They specifically use the word forging in the summary.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing we see the rings of power. They say
so we might see
might
see the 9 kings of men turning into the Nazgul. It's part of the narrative.
It talks about kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin. I mean, and then they talk about Numenor, so that's probably one of the
Probably
obvious
Numenor.
ones.
Yeah, I don't know how much they're going to
That-
compress, but yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, because Numenor has like a 5,000-year history, right?
So Dan, we talked a little bit in
thing-
getting ready for the panel. We talked a little bit about you giving us kind of a brief synopsis of Numenor. Would you like to do that right
sure.
now?
I did some research. I've only read the Silmarillion once, so I am paling in comparison to Bob. So the beginning of the Second Age is when Numenor was founded,
Right.
and the Valar after the final ruin of Beleriand, and that's an interesting thing too. Like, are they going to have the Valar in there at all? Because that comes into play with the destruction of Numenor. And until up to this point, we've always been kind of, as grounded as you can be in this fantasy world where there aren't necessarily gods and things like that. So I'm really curious how they're going to handle all that. So Numenor becomes this island that the Valar raise out of the ocean, becomes home, the kingdom of the Numenorians, and subsequently the Dunedain. They were forbidden from sailing far enough westward to where they could not see Numenor anymore, because westward was where the Undying Lands lived, and they didn't want them to, and no man was allowed over there. They were blessed with long life, not immortality, but long life. And something that I must have glossed over, I just didn't realize it, or maybe it's in appendices, but Elros, the very first king of Numenor, is Elrond's brother.
Right.
And
He
decided to
the
live
Elrond's
as a
human
mortal.
side, mortal side?
Well, yeah, Elrond and Elros are both given the choice of becoming mortal or immortal, and Elros chose the gift of mortality, and Elrond decided to stay immortal.
Immortal. Okay.
Right. So it'll be interesting if there's any interplay with those characters. So over time, the Numenorians began to resent the ban. They also were resentful about not being immortal. They lived for 300 to 400 years. I believe the royalty lived for a little bit longer. It's my understanding. They're still mighty. So in the Second Age of 3255, so we're 3,000 years into the Second Age now, they're still very strong. They sailed to Middle Earth, came in such force that Sauron surrendered in person. He's like, okay, I'm not even going to fight this battle.
Wow.
But he did that, and then he was able to get in somehow and become kind of a worm tongue to them, and he started to where am I? So he started to poison the mind of the king and soon corrupted them. He promised the Numenorians eternal life if they would worship Morgoth. So they built this huge temple to Morgoth, began doing human sacrifices. A lot of not so good stuff. Elendil, he was the son of the leader of the faithful. So there's kind of two factions of Numenorians, the faithful and then the people who were following Sauron and Morgoth. So he sets sail from Numenor right before it gets destroyed. And they land in Middle Earth, and they establish two kingdoms there, Gondor and Arnor. Eventually, this line has faded into obscurity. In Gondor, the last king dies about 1,000 years before Lord of the Rings takes place. And that leaves in place the stewards that we eventually get to with Denethor. In Arnor, the kingdom is completely destroyed, and the royals head into semi-exile under the title of chieftains of the Dunedain, and they quietly fight against the darkness as rangers. So Arathorn is one of these. He gets married to a lady named Gilren, and a year later, Aragorn is born. 2 years after that, Arathorn is slain with an arrow through the eye by an orc. So now the heir of these two kingdoms is a 2-year-old kid. Not the best thing, especially because Sauron is specifically sending out orcs and other bad guys to try to end that bloodline. So Elrond takes him into Rivendell, him and his mom, and raises him there. And he raises him in secret, as far as Aragorn's knowledge of who he is. He gives him a new name, which I wrote down, and now I'm trying to find, but it means hope, Estil. So he keeps his lineage a secret. Aragorn turns 21, And Elrond comes and tells him, say, okay, this is who you are. And he brings some of the heirlooms from his family, including Isildur's sword. Yeah, Narsil.
The broken sword, right?
The broken
Narsil.
sword, yeah. So this is kind of mind-blowing for Aragorn, he's already proven himself in battle. He's a respected guy. He's a good guy. And now he finds out he's the heir to all these kingdoms. The next day, he's wandering around the forest, and he meets Arwen, falls in love with her. But Elrond isn't a fan of that match. So shortly thereafter,
Like any other dad.
Aragorn, yeah, exactly. You're not good enough. He goes off into the wilderness and starts, being a ranger. My understanding, a few years after he leaves, he runs into Gandalf, and they become really good friends. They start, going around doing side quests and helping each other out and everything. And during this time, Aragorn is already, like I said, a good warrior. He's respected, he's renowned, but he gets a lot of wisdom from Gandalf as well. He also, and this is alluded to a little bit in Lord of the Rings, but Aragorn goes and fights with different armies. He fights with Thengel of Rohan, who is, help me out, the king of Rohan in Lord of the Rings. It just starts with the TH as well.
Theoden.
Theoden.
Yeah. So fights with his dad. Then he goes to Gondor, fights a bunch of battles with them. He becomes, he gets in pretty close with Ecthelion II, who is Denethor's dad, and he becomes really respected by him. He goes out and fights this great battle, and instead of returning home, getting a lot of honor in Gondor, he's like, nope, I'm going to go out into the wilderness again. He goes out into the wilderness. Then the next thing we really hear about him is in the books of the Lord of the Rings, no, not the movies. He teams up with Gandalf to track down Gollum and capture Gollum. And
there was actually a fan film that got a lot of attention about Aragorn chasing after Gollum and capturing him.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. I wasn't aware of that. So that's pretty much the backstory of Aragorn, what he was doing before the and where he comes from. So it'll be interesting to see how much they allude to that, because that's like a 6,000 year things from the beginning of Numenor to Aragorn. So
they say it's a different age, but like the original rumors were all about a young Aragorn story. It would be very easy for them to use young Aragorn as a frame story, like they did with in Lord of the Rings, and have like everything we see be like Estelle's training in Rivendell. That would be one way to handle it, because this is all, very important information to young Aragorn, as he's learning who he is and, what his family means.
Right.
And one of my questions to both of you was going to be, looking at the Second Age, is there a character who can kind of be the protagonist for this series, the one to kind of take the audience on the journey, or are they going to have to mess with some timelines and maybe young Aragorn's going to be the protagonist?
See, it depends on how much ground they cover, because so they say lands beyond on the far reaches of the map. They could be talking about Sauron in exile. Sauron comes out of exile in 500, and returns and raises Barad-dûr in year 1000. And then he doesn't forge the rings until 1500, right? So there's a lot of ground being covered there. If you want one per protagonist, you were talking Gil-galad and Galadriel. That's who we got. But if every season is one generation of Numenorians, then you got a whole other story where every season could be an anthology story taking place during one generation of Numenorians.
Oh, there's a lot of places they could go with this series. Holy
but yeah,
crap.
as far as mortals, or even a Numenorian who lives for 400 years, that's a small chunk of that huge thousands and thousands of years. So,
well, and one thing that Jackson did, and we're talking about hundreds and even thousands of years of history in the Second Age. the one thing that Jackson did that seemed to work pretty well from a film standpoint was he compressed time. The time
Sometimes
between
comically.
Gandalf. Well, Gandalf leaving after Bilbo's birthday, and then coming back to tell Frodo about the ring. In the book, it's 17 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the movie, it's maybe a few months.
Well,
at
and
best.
and Bill and Frodo takes off that night, where in the books it's like 6 months later that he takes off. So
pack a few things, take your time.
Yeah.
Also, with when they get to Bree, they buy a house and settle in at Bree. And in the movies, they get to Bree, and immediately they're being, the Black Riders are hot on their tail. So there might be some time compression with the series.
I don't mind that.
No.
When you're adapting something to screen, like it's fine to be telling stories in such in kind of a high historical tone, and but we gotta be getting attached to people's faces. That's how humans, relate to other humans.
Right. And as awesome as Tom Bombadil is, his part is very small. It would not, unless they tried to shoehorn him in somewhere else.
I want to point out we don't know. We do not know how small Tom Bombadil's, because Sauron is getting all up in Tom Bombadil's grill throughout the Second Age. We do not know what Tom Bombadil was doing in his secret war against Sauron. We have no idea.
That's true. But unless they're going to invent all this stuff for Lord of the Rings movies, his character doesn't fit.
They have to invent almost everything.
And the series may be redemption for Tom Bombadil. He may get his prime time, him and Glorfingal. Maybe they'll be like a R2-D2 C-3PO.
His pants are blue, his boots are yellow, and they're here to kick your ass, right? Tom Bombadil's ready to rock and roll.
What was interesting to me is I was rereading Lord of the Rings recently, and they used some of his lines in the extended edition, at least, when Treebeard is talking to Merry and Pippin. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I did not catch that. Yeah,
like when Merry and Pippin get swallowed up by the roots, and Treebeard comes and saves them. He uses some of Tom Bombadil's
It's only fair because they stole Treebeard's lines and gave them to Galadriel for the opening of Fellowship of the Ring. So
yeah,
I feel it in the waters,
Yeah. Everybody just shares.
But yeah, but that's the big point, is that almost none of this is, the bit on the Second Age, even in the Silmarillion, the appendix has got to be even smaller. Even the Silmarillion, it's like 30, 40 pages, right? It's not, there's not much there. Yeah. Anything they do is going to have to be wildly expanded to make a TV show. So you say, not unless they add stuff, they're going to be adding stuff. They've got to add, they can get some character names is about all they got. We don't know much about any of the characters.
I was referring to in the Lord of the Rings movies that we already had.
Oh,
add a lot. Yeah. For the TV show, they're going to have to make it almost all up. They've got the framework.
Yeah, because we've got Alpharazon and Anatar the gift giver. We got a lot on that era, but nothing else.
Another piece of information that's come out, I don't know how recently, is that this series will be filmed in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And not only that, John Howe, who was one of the two conceptual artists for the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, is doing the conceptual art, a lot of the conceptual art for this series. So I think any thoughts on that, on it going back to New Zealand and getting some people involved that were involved with the original trilogy?
Well, New Zealand is just a smart budget choice, but I love how, as a choice.
I just hope they do more practical stuff than they did in The Hobbit, because you look at the orcs and stuff in Lord of the Rings, and you look at The Hobbit, and it's like, come on, we're not there yet to where it looks as good. So I love the fact that
the orcs did look weird in The Hobbit.
They're all CG.
I remember thinking that the first time, since they're all CG.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe 6 or 7 years later, the the technology's refined itself to where they'll look more flesh and blood. But
Yeah.
Well, it would be in a
the orcs
movie.
in the
but,
Lord of the Rings series are far superior. What was that, Bob?
I was saying it would be in a movie, but this is going to be a TV show. We're going to
True,
get.
but it's also Amazon throwing lots of money at it. So
Yeah, but
Yeah.
look at Luke in Mandalorian. He was a step above Leia and Tarkin, but not that big a step. Because they still
and still not as good as the deep fakes.
Yeah, but because they still had a TV budget, right? To do
True.
it with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazon paid the Tolkien estate $250 million for the rights for this TV series. So I don't think they're going to go cheap on the special effects.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's gonna. But here's the thing. I don't think it's going to be the special effects that are going to get most of their budget. I think it's going to be locations, cast, costumes. I mean, if they go like half the budget of Game of Thrones, they still don't have half the grandeur. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
just
and Game of Thrones cost HBO, I think, toward the end, it was for the hour-long episodes, it was $10 million per episode it cost, and then when they got into the later seasons, the episodes that didn't work as well for the series, but were 90 minutes long, they were spending upwards from 20 to 30 per million per episode. So, they've got
substantial.
There's substantial money. Speaking of Game of Thrones, I don't know if the two of you ever read about the disrobed elephant in the room. Apparently, there's a rumor that there's going to be some nudity and adult content. Your thoughts on that? Is it something that fans of the series that don't really care for R-rated or TVMA content should worry about, or is it just something that is just bringing attention to the show without giving anything away early on?
I would have to know what it is. Like, there's a certain line I don't want you to cross in Tolkien, but there's also things that could get you qualified as TVMA that wouldn't bother me in Tolkien. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'd really have to know what it is.
Yeah.
If it's Game of Thrones-ish, I probably wouldn't like it, but
right. I think it does depend on the context. One thing that I love about the Lord of the Rings is they are, there's gore and violence, but it's nothing over the top. Sometimes it's even a little bit comical, to where something that I feel okay watching with my family, and my kids are big fans, and so I would hope for that sake, for that fact, that they would stick to a more PG-13. I'm not of the camp to where there's always I understand sometimes there's artistic reasons for nudity and things like that. But most of the time it's just tossed in there, I feel like,
right.
To get a different rating or whatever.
And the adult content of Game of Thrones, I don't know if you've read the books, but that was more in line with what George R.R. Martin put in the books.
Yeah,
very much so.
It was pretty consistent with the books themselves.
Yeah. and I just don't. Well, I would hope that these producers and showrunners and decision makers would be smarter than to say, "Hey, Game of Thrones had this, so let's put this in our fantasy." But the sex and the nudity wasn't the reason why Game of Thrones was successful. It was the character.
Yeah.
It was the journey these characters were on, and to think that the difference between being successful and non-successful has to be adult content. That's a simplistic way of thinking that I think would only spell doom for the series.
I used to work for. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just the extended edition of the Battle of Five Armies got an R rating for violence, I guess. Did it add anything to it? I didn't even notice anything that was super explicit. It's kind of the point where you're disassociated and it's just orcs, like who cares about them? It's not something like as visceral as humans getting impaled and stuff. So I don't know. I am also of the camp of, like, violence doesn't bother me as much. So I don't know. I'd like to keep, like I said, I'd like to keep it PG-13. Sorry, Bob, I cut you
I
off.
was just gonna say I've spent a lot of time in my career working for Iron Crown Enterprises, and I never actually worked on the Middle Earth products, but you know, I worked with a lot of those people, and I've run a lot of Middle Earth games with the Rollmaster product, which is what I did work on. And one of the things that always was a compass to me was like in a D&D game, if you asked if somebody was going to go invisible and the spell was like unclear on whether or not it made their clothes invisible, you know, I might get into a big debate over whether or not the person had disrobed before or after or what have you. But whenever I was doing Middle Earth, I would always just ask myself, well, what would Professor Tolkien say? You know, and I'd always know Professor Tolkien would say the thing that a polite British man would say, would always preserve somebody's modesty, it would always preserve their decorum. You know, I always had that as a guiding principle whenever I was doing a Middle Earth game.
And he was a strong Catholic, and
yeah, you know. I hope that but he was also a World War I vet, so you know what I mean. If I don't mind if the MA kind of goes into these horrors that he experienced, right? But I do hope that they keep his decorum in mind, right?
And I think of the kids, and not only the adults who kind of shy away from R-rated TVMA material, but the kids too. You have a chance of having a huge audience, including younger kids whose parents may not let them watch stuff like that too. So it just to me, it just makes sense from a economics, and you know, how many streams, that's going to determine the show's success. How many streams per episode?
Are we going to talk about like Sauron's situation at the beginning of this, or is that something I should bring up now because I have something I want to say about it?
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
I don't know how many people know who Sauron is in the Second Age, right? Like he was lieutenant of Morgoth. Well, at the beginning, like when it starts, right? Until he declares himself, Bilge Barad-dûr declares himself. Who the hell is Sauron, right? I would love if somebody in the story says, "Wait, isn't that the guy who got his butt kicked by a girl and her dog?" Right? Because that's like almost the only time I think Sauron has shown up in the thing is when Luthien and, you know, her puppy just beat him down, right? I mean, she does it with song, through the power of song. Yeah. She doesn't even do it like she beats him down like the power of song, right? It's like an anime. It's an anime beatdown. It doesn't even get a Western beatdown.
There you go. Yeah. Does her hair flow when
right.
she's beating him down?
But like, how many people in, like, if you say the name Sauron, how many people in Middle Earth even know? Like, Ale knows who he is because he was Ale's disciple. He's a Valar, right?
Yeah. Well, and people that have watched the Jackson movies, they know him. You know, in the prologue for Fellowship of the Ring, he's this big dude,
right,
with a mace that is pretty powerful until he gets his hand cut off, and then he's a big eye after that.
Right, and I'll point out that the first time that they confront him in the Second Age, he just gives up, and they all believe it. Right? That's what they think of Sauron when they show up with an army, and he says, "Nope, you got me. You showed up with an army. I can't fight an army." They're all like, "Well, of course you can't fight an army. He's just like one guy, right?" Like, whereas the Third Age people, they would have never have fallen for that. They would have been like, "What's he tricking us with?" Sauron could,
right?
Sauron's got something up his sleeve if he says he can't fight an army. Now, there was also a big army. So it was Gil-galad and the Alliance. You know, go on.
Yeah, be interesting if they did something. I mean, maybe they could make him kind of a Loki character, to where he's kind of a, you know, you're not sure of his intentions. I mean, we are. As the audience, but the people in there, you know, because obviously, you know, he is the gift giver, or what's his
A-LOTR
name?
The gift giver. Yeah. I mean, he's totally the Loki character throughout it. Yeah.
So it'll just be, I mean, again, a lot of it boils down to what stage of these ages are we looking at?
Yeah. I mean, they take Sauron prisoner. He convinces the king to like make him his best bud, and then like his high priest, and then like, you know, corrupts the Nazgul, gets the dwarfs to get the rings, corrupts the elven rings. He does all of this without anybody like catching that he's up to anything. He's like a way better Loki character than Loki has ever been, right?
Right.
Loki's foiled in every one of his legends. At least all the Thor ones, at least.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming to the end. I just, for the last little bit, I wanted to go to both of you and say, okay, imagine yourself, you've been hired as a consulting producer to this Amazon Lord of the Rings series. Kind of give me some bullet points. We'll start with Dan and then go to Robert. Give me some bullet points of what you would recommend to the writers, to the producers, and other decision makers for this series. As a fan of Tolkien and someone who knows what they've liked and haven't liked about the past adaptations for film and TV of both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
It's a great question. For one, I would say look at the original Peter Jackson trilogy, dissect that, try to figure out what works, what might not work so well. Number two, as much as you can, stick to practical effects, because there's just something about that really lends itself to believability and authenticity. I would stay away from, obviously you're going to have to make up a lot of stuff, but stay away from trying to shoehorn in certain things. Try to find, like we mentioned, what's our character that's going to be our through line, who we're going to follow. Try to find somebody compelling and just hitch your wagon to that person. I don't know, and good luck, I guess.
And for Pete's sake, do not feel like you have to bring Legolas back. Okay.
Your first season. So here's the thing: study Empire Strikes Back, because Numenor is super boring for like 2,000, 3,000 years, right? But things start heating up in Eriador much earlier than that. So you could, which is the same model as Empire Strikes Back. Everything going on with Luke, super boring. Everything going on with Han and Leia, super exciting, right? But they mirror each other, so you think the stuff going on with Luke is super exciting. Very tricky, mind tricky, right? You could do the same thing with this, where your whole first season, nothing bad could happen in Numenor. But you're building up Numenor as paradise, while on Eriador, Gilgalad, Galadriel's husband, who's doesn't ever accomplish anything. So let's give him a little time in the sun. Maybe he is the one who spots Sauron and starts being the guy that starts waging a guerrilla war against Sauron. And he's the only one, him and Tom Bombadil, both in yellow boots, kicking butt, right? Maybe that's our first season, while we're just, going back and forth. And, finish like the first season with either like the forging of the rings of power, or the raising of Barad-dûr. You might start with the raising of Barad-dûr, and then don't get the army landing until like the end of the second season. Just have a slow build. Give yourself like 5 seasons to tell the story.
Well, they've, according to the research I did, there may be up to 20 episodes for season 1, which is for streaming platforms. That's a lot of shows.
That's a lot.
Traditionally, a season on like the big broadcast TV shows or TV networks were 20 to 24 episodes. Streaming, it's been like 6 to 13, with 10 kind of being that sweet spot. So if they're doing 20 episodes for season 1, and Amazon's already ordered to season 2, apparently, from what I read as well, they feel like they have a lot of ground to cover.
Well, I'll be there for episode 1 at least.
I'll be there too, and maybe we'll get the Yellow Boot Brothers.
Kicking butt and walking all over everybody. Yeah.
To the Nancy Sinatra song, right?
Rhyming in whatever that rhyme scheme is that is an dynamic pentameter that I can't remember what it's called, that Tom Bombadil always rhymes in. Yeah. We had like one question, but
What is the question? We might have a minute or two.
Yeah, what are your predictions for the show in light of the recent Tolkien film? Was the only question that was ever asked. I think we kind of covered it. I think that's what our whole subject's been. Like, I think you're right. I think they're going to try to stay more true to reality, and less CGI because of their problems with The Hobbit. They can't not invent stuff. They can't. I mean, like, that was their big criticism of The Hobbit, but they can't not do that. They just can't. It's not possible. So I think they just have to try to make it as real and honest as possible, would be my prediction. Dan,
use the tools available and the tools they know that work.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I just realized I didn't ever finish my Batman comparison.
Oh,
so, going back, and it's my fault, but so like Batman and Robin came out, and it was pretty awful by most metrics. So I think it was only 7 years later when Batman Begins came out, which would have been like 5 years when they announced it or whatever. And at that point, I think the whole consciousness was like, "Ooh, is this going to work?" They screwed up Batman pretty badly, and then Batman Begins came out. It was great. It didn't do super good at the box office, but it set the stage for The Dark Knight and stuff. So I think it's kind of, the quest is on a razor's edge, right? So like they can come out with something great, and it's going to kind of like, people are going to be like, okay, maybe The Hobbit wasn't so bad or whatever. We don't care about it so much. Or if it's Hobbit level, they're going to be like, oh, maybe we should just stay out of Middle Earth for a while longer.
I mean, we could have a whole situation where we have the sequels and then The Mandalorian, right? Where they said, okay, let's just like step back and reevaluate where we are.
Right. I think the long form storytelling of a TV series gives them more bandwidth to do that. I mean, you can't tell the Mandalorian story the way they told it in film. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
And to go back to your Batman analogy, there's even a shorter amount of time between Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield that kind of ended that series. And then they rebooted the character again in the MCU with Captain America: Civil War. And I remember when the word got out that Spider-Man was going to be reintroduced again, there was a lot of groaning and a lot of dire predictions on the internet. And the character they brought out with the third reboot was great.